back to another episode of Garden Path. Today we're here with Debbie Merriam, Director of Landscape Design and Horticulture at the Mary B. Wakefield Charitable Trust in Milton. And we are going to talk to you today about Polly G. Wakefield, her contributions to the dogwood family and trees in general. So I'm standing here in front of a tree that's estimated to be from the 1800s, a very old red oak, which is, I'm happy to say, is wider than I am. So Debbie, thank you for joining us today and telling us a little bit about Polly. So Polly was a special woman, somebody ahead of her time. Would you like to tell us a little bit about her?
Yeah, so this property, the Wakefield Charitable Trust, has been in the same family for 300 years. And Polly Wakefield was the last member of the family to live on the property. And she left this property to be used for education and community engagement. She was an avid landscape designer and plant propagator. She went to the Groton School for, the Lothrop School for Landscape Architecture for Women. And then she came and lived on the property and planted hundreds of specimen plants all over the landscape. And her specific interest was in the Coosa dogwood. She worked closely with the Arnold Arboretum to develop her collection, and all of the Coosas, over 250 of them, came from 3 trees at the Arnold Arboretum.
That's an amazing collection. So tell us, what makes a Coosa dogwood a Coosa dogwood?
So the dogwood family is quite large, and the Coosa dogwood is an Asian variety of dogwood tree. And so for the native dogwood here is the Cornus florida. The Cornus Coosa is the Asian variety. And Polly was particularly interested in the Asian variety because of its cold hardiness and its ability to withstand several diseases that are very common for the native Florida dogwood.
That's pretty special. So with the dogwood that are growing here, Polly started a lot of them from seed.
Yes.
Correct. And they're now in the tell us a little bit about your identification program.
So Polly, she patented 7 varieties of these Coosa dogwood trees, but unfortunately she didn't map them on the landscape. So we're currently working with Connecticut College. Dr. Martha Grossel and a class there came and collected DNA from probably 25 Coosa dogwoods. And they're comparing that DNA to the DNA of the cultivars, which have already been DNA sequenced, to see if there are matches. And we just heard that they've come up with 4 or 5 matches, which is very exciting for us. So now we'll know which ones on the property are the patented varieties that Polly did.
And are these patented varieties being sold out in nurseries?
Yes, so some of these patented varieties are available. Specifically, Greensleeves was her most popular variety, and Moonbeam and Fanfare. So it's been quite an interesting process tracking these varieties throughout the country and actually throughout the world. Some of them are available in Japan, some in Canada, and a lot of them in southern and western United States.
Oh, that's very cool to think that those 3 came from Milton, Massachusetts, and are Polly Wakefield.
Yes,
wow.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
She liked the plants that had particularly good, strong bloom and also very glossy and large leaves.
So besides dogwood, you had mentioned other trees that Polly was interested in?
Yeah. The other reason Polly really liked the Coosa dogwood is for its very unusual bark. So a lot of the trees we have on the property have amazing camouflage bark. And some of these trees include the paperbark maple, lacebark pine, and Japanese stewardia. And we'll see them later in our tour.
And the stewardia is one of my favorite trees of all time.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to be going out back to see the tree collection. So can we go take a walk?
Sure.
All right. Well, we're now standing in the front garden, which is a beautiful garden that was made before Polly, and it's got little rooms, little angles. So Deb, can you tell us a little bit about this front garden?
Yeah, so this garden was designed to go with the mansion house and the carriage barn, and it sits pretty much equally between the two buildings. The mansion house was built in 1794, and then the carriage barn was built in 1864. So this garden sort of blends the two buildings together. And it has been changed many times over many years, and we know this from an excellent series of photographs that we have of the garden. So at one point it was a garden that was just full of roses. At another time it was a garden that was all annuals. And another time it was a garden that was all peonies. And now the garden is a little bit a mixture of a variety of plants. And the reason for that is we've oriented the garden towards our educational programs, and that is to have things that bloom a lot in the spring and the fall when the school kids are here. And while I'm talking about that, I'll just mention that we have 2,000 school kids come here, K through 5, mostly Boston Public Schools, for environmental education. So a lot of our plant material blooms in the spring, and then they really get to see what happens in the life cycle of plants and flowers.
Well, sounds like a great program. So I do see some trees along with shrubs. And what's that little structure back there?
So that is the summer house, and on a day like today, it would be really nice if we were sitting in there because it's always cool because of this huge tulip poplar here. It's one of the older trees on the landscape, and it's also very unusual this far north in New England. But the summer house is a lovely place to enjoy the garden and also look into the orchard and off to the distance. And it was obviously designed in this very linear pattern, and with these little garden roofs that each represent a different part of the landscape. And you mentioned the trees, and Polly always had a four square planting of red buds, or Cercis canadensis, a beautiful flowering tree that have just passed. They flower early in the spring. And what's unique about these is she planted two Cercis canadensis that bloom white as opposed to pink. And the funniest thing about this one is you'll see that it's actually fallen over, but it still has spectacular bloom. So we leave that as a good thing for school kids to understand that trees are very resilient and they'll keep going regardless of whether they're standing up or have they fallen over. Polly loved this garden because it represented her interests in Japanese style and also French and Italian style of gardening. So she liked to put little unusual elements surrounding the garden, these little finials on the poles, and then some of these unique shapes that were around the garden as well. The finials represent her husband's love of sailing. He was an avid sailor, and this was the mark on his sail, and that's why they are the way they are. So it's kind of interesting.
It's very cool. So she could sit here when she wanted to just find some nice peace and quiet and hear the birds and listen to the wind and look at the house or look at beautiful flowers, which you still have a lot of great peonies.
Yeah, a lot of peonies in this garden. She also had topiaries, and we have small topiaries in the garden. There's a lot of perennials that are going to come up later, and then we have a lot of fall perennials as well. A lot of lilies also.
I bet it's ablaze with color.
The other very unusual plant we have, it's a rhododendron known as a Schlippenbachia. It's kind of a fun word to say. And it blooms first thing in the spring before there are any leaves out, and it's a bright pink color. And it's just stunning. It looks like butterflies flying in the air, and it's so great because nothing else is blooming at the time. It's very special.
Too bad we missed it.
Yes.
We'll have to come back in the spring next year. We're standing out on the piazza lawn in front of two amazing trees where the bark is much better than the bite. So Deb, you said these are a couple of your favorite trees on the property. Why don't you tell us?
Okay, so these are two of my favorite trees, and mostly because they're incredible bark. This is a lace bark pine, Pinus bungiana. Very, very rare this far north, and that's because they can withstand the cold, but they can't withstand snow load. So if you decide to get one for your garden, you need to maintain it very well and keep it pruned. But this is a stunning example of a lacebark pine, and the kids love this tree because it looks like their camouflage clothing. And it's just a very unusual tree. and it has actually, the candles on it are quite nice. And it's a very nice pine.
It's just beautiful.
Yes.
And we've had some pretty bad winters
Yes.
recently. So did that hurt it in any way?
It did lose one of the big limbs off of the back, unfortunately. It was a very sad day when that happened. But it seems to have healed and it's carrying on. So that's a
So this type of lacebark pine is originated from where?
This is an Asian variety also, mostly China. I do see a fair amount of these now in arboretums in the mid-Atlantic region, but not so far north.
So this is beautiful. So how do you prune something so large?
Well, so what I meant is if we actually purchase some smaller ones of these trees to replace them someday, and they're in our nursery. So every winter, and actually when their trees are not growing as much, we do some pruning to keep the limbs from getting too long and loose, and that's when they'd have problems.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the other tree that is really special is this paperbark maple. And this tree does do very well in New England. And if you want a great tree for your garden, this is a very special tree because not only does it have this fantastic bark on it, it has a beautiful fall color. And even when the leaves have completely fallen off, it shines this coppery color when the sun's hitting it in the wintertime. So it's another really special tree that you don't see in New England very often, but does very well here.
Well, now we're standing in front of the paperbark maple, which you can see the bark peels off like pieces of paper. And the different colors and in the bark itself, and just this copper color is just spectacular. So Deb, tell us about these little signs.
Yeah, so recently we've identified over 60 trees on the property, and we've had these tree tags made because when people come to visit us during our Dogwood Days celebration, they often ask us, what kind of tree is that? It's down around the corner behind the house. And so we felt that it was time that we actually start interpreting our landscape and adding landscape or tree tags to our more unusual variety of trees. So they have the common name, the Latin name, where the family that they're from, and their native range. And they also have a little number on the corner, and we're using those numbers to develop a specific tree tour for people to take when they come to the estate.
Very cool. And you have the logo of the estate, which is a dogwood, and I am wearing my dogwood necklace today in honor of Polly. So,
very nice.
Great tree.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to talk about while we're here is this is a very special location for Polly. This is the piazza lawn here, and the mansion house sits right behind us. And Polly's office was on the second floor of the mansion. And when she laid out her gardens, she wanted to be able to see the gardens from her office. So she planted her dogwoods all along and all below us, and we're going to go there next. But the best thing about this was she planted specific dogwoods. Some dogwoods are called upstairs dogwoods and some are called downstairs dogwoods. And the reason for that is the flowers either face upward or downward. So Polly planted a lot of the trees with the upward facing flowers closer to this side of the landscape, and then the ones with the downward facing flowers closer to away from the mansion where she couldn't see them. I always thought that was such a fascinating thing to think about when she laid out her gardens.
That's very cool. Now, are the dogwoods that are here, because a lot of them won't be in bloom today, were they pink, white, or?
Yes. So normally Kousa dogwoods have white blooms, but we do have a few Kousas that have a slight pinkish tinge. And it's always interesting to see them because it seems to depend on the moisture that we get and sort of the longevity of the bloom, because oftentimes they'll start out white and then they'll turn pink as the bloom ages.
Very cool. Let's see if we can go find some. Well, we're standing in front of the Kalmia garden and the rolling lawn as I sniff the heavenly fragrance of the lily of the valley and look at the flower of this little dogwood. So Deb, you had talked about some of the interesting trees that are growing in here and the area and the prehistoric tree as well. So why don't we explain what's going on?
Okay. Yeah, so this is Polly's formal gardens that she laid out when she and her husband moved into the mansion house in the 50s. And this was a very steep slope all the way down to the end of the property, and she actually had it made into terraces, which must have been a huge amount of work. And she wanted to do that so she could really showcase different plant material in this area. So she created garden rooms, and then she also created this beautiful Kalmia lawn and rolling lawn. And the reason it's called the rolling lawn is because Polly loved dogs. She always had dogs, whether they were big German Shepherds down to Jack Russell Terriers. Every single photograph of Polly, there's a dog in it. And that's actually how we've dated a lot of those photographs, based on what dog she had at what time.
So is that what you call dogwood?
Dogwood, yes. But so the reason it's the rolling lawn is because the dogs used to love to come down here and take a swim in the fountain, and then they would go and roll on the lawn. So that is how it got its name.
That's great.
But it's also a place that she can showcase some of her unique specimens, and one of those is called the prehistoric tree, or the dinosaur tree, and that is the dawn redwood. The dawn redwood is an Asian species of tree, and it was thought to be extinct until several people discovered it growing in China and brought the seed here to the United States. And that happened right around 1945, between 1945 and 1950. And we have a letter from Polly to someone saying as a thank you letter, saying thank you for giving us 4 baby dawn redwood trees for our wedding present. So that's how we've dated them to the date that Polly got married. So she planted these trees in just 1950, and these trees have grown to this height in just 60 years. So it's a very fast growing tree, and it's a very unique species. So there's 4 planted here on the property. I've seen some in Milton and other places, but there's also some really amazing specimens at the Arnold Arboretum. The other tree that is very special in this planting is our ginkgo biloba, and that's down below. It's a large ginkgo tree. Polly loved this species, and she planted it right in the center. In the ginkgos, there's female and male ginkgo trees, and unfortunately this is a female ginkgo, so the fruit is very, very smelly when it falls to the ground. It's considered a delicacy in some cultures, but when the kids come and visit, they just talk about how smelly it is the whole time. But it's a beautiful specimen, and it has incredibly beautiful leaves on it.
So the male trees aren't as smelly?
No, the males don't have fruit.
Oh.
Only the females have the fruit.
Wow.
So, yeah. And since we're talking about fruit, the other reason Polly really liked Coosa dogwoods is she actually thought that the fruit of the Coosa dogwood was a marketable commodity. In the fall, Coosa dogwoods have beautiful, big, red, well, they're about a little smaller than an apricot, and they taste somewhere between a peach and an apple. So she thought that she could grow all these Coosas and collect the fruit and somehow market the fruit. It's very high in vitamin C, but unfortunately they're full of seeds and are very difficult to get out. People have made pretty good Coosa wine and supposedly Coosa beer as well. We've made some jam with it, but it is very hard to work with. But it's a great snack when you're working in the garden and you want to enjoy some of the Coosa fruit down here.
I'll have to try to remember that.
Yeah, very tasty. A lot of people are afraid to eat them, but they're really tasty. Animals love them too, so they're actually a really good wildlife plant. And it gives you this great fall. Not only do the Coosa dogwoods have good fall color, but then all this red fruit throughout the Coosas is really nice.
Very cool. Now I wanted to ask about the dawn redwood. That's deciduous?
So that's a good question. The dawn redwood is what we call a deciduous conifer. So it's a conifer, but it drops its needles. Most conifers keep their needles throughout the winter. So a lot of people see this tree and they think it's actually dead. But it's natural. The leaves just came out, or the needles just came out about 2 weeks ago. So it drops all of its needles in the fall and then re-leaves out in the spring.
Very, very cool tree.
Yeah.
So now we're in the alley of Coosa dogwood. So can we take a little stroll and talk
Yeah.
about that?
Certainly.
Well, one of the things that you see throughout this beautiful estate are these amazing gates. And they have been here for how many years, Deb?
We're not sure. So Polly designed all of these gates, and it was probably after a trip when she went to Asia, and that was in the 70s. So we think they're probably from the 70s. And we also have seen them in photographs from as early as the 70s.
Well, they're just beautiful. So when you open the gate, you see this beautiful alley of dogwoods. So let's go take a walk down.
So Polly planted, this is an allée that actually stretches for 300 feet and is completely planted with Kusa dogwoods all the way down. And it's really stunning when the trees bloom, and they'll be blooming in about 2 to 3 weeks. So they have these gorgeous white blooms overhanging all the way down the allée. And recently we did a huge project where we put cobblestones that line all of the gardens. So it really adds this pop-out element to this landscape. This is also the area where Polly planted hundreds of her Kusa dogwoods in grids. Originally she thought that she would actually dig them up and sell them, but then we figure that she actually just became very attached to them and just ended up leaving them here. One of the problems with this is that Polly planted the Kusa dogwoods quite close to each other because she was always thinking that she would dig them up, and she never did. So it's very important when you plant a tree of any size that you really think about what that tree is going to end up being, how big it's going to get ultimately, because you want to make sure that that tree has enough space that it can fulfill its true meaning, which is that it will grow to its full size and have its full blossom, and you can really appreciate that in those trees. We still can appreciate the incredible bloom in this allée, but it takes a lot of maintenance. We have to constantly go through and prune it and look to let light in, otherwise we won't get any blooms in this area. So it takes a lot to maintain it, but it's a truly spectacular feature of this property.
So speaking of bloom, you mentioned that the flower isn't a flower.
Yes.
But,
so the other thing about the Kusa dogwoods, and any native dogwoods for that matter as well, and that everyone thinks that the white blossom that you see on a Kusa is the flower, but the reality is the blossom or the white petals are leaves. They're called bracts, and the actual flower is very, very tiny on the inside. It's a tiny little ball, and it just gets tiny little inflorescence flowers on it, very small. So that's very interesting.
Very
feature.
cool. Well, we're now standing in front of the mist house, and a lot of flower pots filled with plants and trees. And these are going to be sold at their Dogwood Days, which is a wonderful event that the Wakefield Estate has every year. So Deb, why don't you tell us a little bit about your Dogwood Days?
Okay, so this year Dogwood Days will run between June 10th and June 17th. And it's the only time that the garden is really open to the public, and will be open every day from 10 to 4. We have tours. We have an amazing selection of trees for sale this year. A lot of the trees that you saw today will be for sale during the sale. We also have a great bonsai workshop. This year we're doing Dogs and Dogwoods, which is a family-friendly event, and where kids bring their dogs, and we have a little dog show down on the rolling lawn. It's a very popular event. And my favorite is Wine, Cheese, and Trees. It's a trivia tour in the evening, and we walk around the property with a glass of wine and some cheese, and we talk about not only trees, but also wine and cheese. And it's a good chance to get out in the garden in the evening, and it's really spectacular. It's a fun time. And then we also have a grand fundraiser, and it's called our Dogwood Days Garden Party. And if you're interested in any of these events, the information is available on our website, which is marywakefieldcharitabletrust.org.
And that event is very fun. They have a fabulous silent auction, and wonderful items are usually in that. But as Deb mentioned, a lot of the trees that we saw and talked about are being sold here. So there's many Kusa dogwood. I see a tulip tree, some maples, some katsuras. If you like plants, this is one of my favorite shade garden ground covers is ginger.
Yeah,
so
European ginger.
European
it's a great ground
ginger,
cover, and the deer won't eat it.
That's always nice.
Yes.
So there's something for everybody here, and if you've never made the trip to the Wakefield Charitable Trust, you should do so. And June 10th through the 17th are the open days that you can come in. And as Deb mentioned, they do have periodic courses throughout the year that you can sign up for. They have apple orcharding,
We have apple orchard workshop. This year we did a mushroom growing workshop. We do propagation workshops. We also have a stone soup series in the wintertime where we bring in people that are interested, that talk about environmental issues or history of Milton. And that is a really fun event. It's a good way to get outside in the winter, and it's also, we have it in the mansion house. It's one of the few times that you can go inside the mansion, so that's a great event as well.
So I highly recommend it. It's part of our town, and Polly Wakefield contributed quite a bit to the dogwood legacy, and she was a Milton girl. So come to the Dogwood Days.